All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Libraries and Weight Rooms podcast. My name is DJ Ligori, and today we are on episode number 161. And this is the show where we talk about how we can do hard things better through both mental and physical fitness. Today, what I want to talk about is something that I have experienced many times in my life, and I don't think I've ever fully appreciated just how important it is to those people who have done this for me. And I would like to think that I've also done this for other people as well. And I want to start this episode today with telling a little story about kind of how all of this came to. And when I was when I was really struggling after college, I was using social media a lot to kind of escape my reality. I had great people around me. I had great family and great mentors, yet I was stressed and I was really struggling with my own mental fitness and what I believed about myself and the stories that I was telling myself. And what ended up happening was one day I was working out at my old school in Rochester, New York, and I saw a old basketball coach of mine. He was currently watching one of his sons play a basketball game in our college gym. And he came up to me and we started talking, and he said, "Hey, how are you?" And he was one of those guys that you could be very honest with. And I said, I'm not doing that great, actually. I'm struggling with these couple of things, and, I don't really know what to do. And he said, "Well, do you want to talk about it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I would actually love to talk about it. That'd be great." And so what ended up happening was we ended up going into the Fisher training room, and I just graduated, so they all knew me fairly well. And I told the head trainer, I said, "Hey, I'll lock up. I know how to do it." And they were all good with that. And we sat there and I just talked for probably 3 hours. And I talked about the thoughts that were going on in my head. I talked about how I kind of felt like a loser, felt like a failure. I had just done 4 years of college and didn't really feel like I had anything to show for it. And all of these plans and these ideas of what I thought my life was going to be were completely not true, and they weren't a real thing. And this individual, who is now, if you haven't realized yet, Scott Gibbs, who ended up starting Acres of Diamonds alongside of me, he just sat there and he just listened, and he didn't necessarily put his ego, up on display. He just listened to me, and he allowed me to feel seen, heard, and understood, and he allowed me to feel valued. Right? Like I actually mattered. And the things that I was struggling with were real things. And this term that I'm about to share with you, I actually learned from Simon Sinek. And so what I realized Scott was doing was he was sitting in the mud with me. And sometimes that's really all we need, is we need somebody just to sit in the mud with us, not offer us advice, not even ask us questions. Really, just sit in the moment that we might be struggling through, so then we feel like we have somebody there to lean on a little bit and to support us through the thing that we might not necessarily know how to get through. So what I realized was when I heard Simon Sinek say this term, sometimes we just need somebody to sit in the mud with us, I realized that this is exactly what Scott was doing for me in that moment of my life. And I want you guys to think about how important, when Scott sat in that mud with me in the training room, that meeting is actually what led me to reach out to Coach Gibbs again and say, "Hey, I really appreciated what you did for me in that meeting. Could we meet again?" And we ended up meeting, I think, the next Saturday, and he sat in the mud a little bit more with me, yet this time it was more focused on, all right, well, what can I do about it? Right? What are the things moving forward that I can do to really get myself out of my own mud? And that eventually then turned into Saturday meetings, Tuesday and Wednesday night meetings for the next 3 years of our lives, where eventually we kind of shifted from each of us talking about our own challenges, and hopefully I could sit in the mud for Scott for some of the things that he might have been challenged with. And we realized that over those 3 years, as I've talked a little bit about before, we were kind of training our mind like a muscle. We were applying intentional stress to it in the form of hard questions to help us see and understand more about who we were and what we ultimately wanted to do with the work that became Acres of Diamonds. And now it's grown into a full mental fitness program for businesses, and it's grown into a full mental fitness program and community for young men. And I don't know if all of this would have happened if Scott didn't have the awareness to sit in the mud with me in that moment of my life. And last week I was listening to a podcast with Andrew Huberman, who many of us know, right? A neuroscientist out of Stanford. And he runs the Huberman Lab podcast. Awesome podcast if you haven't checked it out already. And Huberman was being interviewed on Diary of a CEO. And that's another awesome podcast that I highly recommend. Stephen Bartlett, I believe, is the host of that. And throughout the whole podcast, there's a great theme that I think Huberman talks about pertaining to sitting in the mud with somebody and what Scott did for me. And he talks about just like the value of friendship and companionship with other people. And Huberman talks about how in the moments of his life where he needed somebody or he didn't know what to do, people just showed up and people just sat with him, sometimes in silence, right? Sometimes they just literally didn't say anything, but they were just there with him during the tough moment. And he's visibly emotional throughout this podcast, and you can see just the humility and the gratitude that he has for those people who were willing to sit in the mud with him when he needed them to. And I think that it's a very refreshing thing when you're struggling with something. Like, maybe sometimes I don't want you to ask me all these questions. Maybe sometimes I don't want you to try and solve my problem. And there's this video that we send out to our business clients that we work with when it comes to listening instead of trying to solve problems. And actually, men, we struggle a lot with this because I think growing up, we are valued based upon usefulness. And it's pretty useful to solve problems. Yet sometimes that need to want to solve problems actually backfires because the importance of somebody just being listened to is actually the more useful thing. And as men, that's sometimes hard to, I think, understand. And so we send this video out of this woman who actually has a nail in her head, and she's explaining to her boyfriend or husband, I feel so stressed. All my sweaters keep getting caught on something. And the general premise of the video is the problem is obvious. Right? The problem is, let's remove that nail from your head and then let's see how you feel. And the guy throughout the whole video is trying to say, hey, I think I know the problem. You have a nail in your head. And she's like, you never just listen to me. And he's like, all right, you know what? You're right. And he just stops trying to solve the problem and he just listens. And at the end, she's like super happy that he just listened to her. And that's, I think, it's such a great video, yet it provides such a powerful lesson where it's like, we don't always have to go around trying to solve people's problems. We don't always have to try to help people see a different perspective, even though, yes, there's some value to it when when the receiver is ready. Yet sometimes maybe we just got to sit in the mud with somebody, right? Sometimes maybe we just have to be that person who it's like, listen, you don't have to be big and strong and tough and resilient right now. I'm going to sit here right with you, and you just do whatever you need to do. And I'm just going to be here with you so that you're not alone. And just that action might be all we need, right? Because I think, too, a lot of the times we don't often need other people's advice. We know what we need to do, right? If we want to lose 10 pounds, we know we have to be a little bit more aware of the food we eat. We have to be a little bit more aware of how we move, how we sleep, right? I think a lot of the times we don't necessarily need all of these new things. We just need to remember the thing that we already know is going to work, or the thing that we are pretty sure is going to work. Yet sometimes there's some fear involved there, right? Sometimes there's some doubt. And having that person just sit there in the mud with you can sometimes clear up that doubt or clear up that fear, right? Because you realize that you're not alone, right? And you realize that this human experience is something that we all share. So I think another piece of this that is really important to me is our young men coaching community that we're building, of young men who want to build better habits, want to be more consistent and be more disciplined and have clearly defined goals and align behaviors that get those goals, right? That achieve those goals while managing our stress and our confidence along the way. We have created a community of young men who will sit in the mud with each other. And each week we talk about, hey, here's a belief that came into my head, or here's a thought that came into my head. And we won't often ask all these questions or this and that. We'll just kind of say, yeah, like I've had that too, right? When do we want to talk about it, right? And sometimes we like to bring those things up in our group sessions. Yet it's really nice to have this support especially from a group perspective, of guys who are like, hey, like, we're not trying to fix you, right? I think ultimately at the end of the day, we each have to fix ourselves, and the self-transformation is really the key here, right? But I think some of that support from other people or from a group is what will ultimately maybe accelerate that. So I think the moral of this story is be the person who sits in the mud with others, right? And suppress our own egos for the greater good of helping somebody else. And be okay too with, hey, maybe I need somebody right now to actually sit in the mud with me, right? Because we're not always going to have the answers, right? And sometimes it's like, dude, I'm stuck, right? And I'm in a rut. And you know what? I don't even know if I want to solve it right now. I just need to just breathe a little bit, right? And having somebody who will do that with you and just support you through that might mean the world to you. So if you guys enjoyed this podcast and this idea, I'm always super grateful if you like, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, or share this on your stories to somebody who you might want to sit in the mud with. Might be kind of cool. So until next time, keep doing hard things through both mental and physical fitness, and we'll talk to you guys soon. We'll see you.